just anyway, Janet was outside, and she said that she had left something for you in the mailbox, your mailbox.
Oh, thank you. Okay, appreciate it. I'll run over there and look between. All right, let's go ahead. Okay, check my mailbox. Thank you.
It must be important.
It must be important. All right, we are.
Janet put something in the mailbox.
Thank you. Hey, there's no spiral of silence going on here. Tell me about it.
People like stick shift from looking down.
All right. Now, the next theory that we look at today is the adaptive structuration theory. And so I've got a couple of pictures that help set us into the frame for this. Now, Noel Newman's theory was about public opinion. You know, so it's like national groups. You can bring it down to smaller groups, but it's really about broad national kind of public opinions is what she's thinking about. Now, this theory has to do more with groups. Now, when we think about group communication, there are like three major theories that have to do with group communication. And this is one of the major theories that will help you describe what goes on in groups, explain, predict what's going to happen in a group, and then transform what goes on in a group. So adaptive structuration theory will be about that. So let me just go over these images for you, and then we'll get into it. Then we'll try to think about what it says to us. Right. Right. Now, a lot of students at Montclair State end up working in groups. Right? You do group work. And a lot of the experience of that is very unpleasant. How many of you would say you've had an unpleasant group experience at Montclair State? All right. So you've had an unpleasant group experience. Part of what makes that unpleasant is you get into a group. Let's say there are 5 people. You get into a group and you look around at what starts to happen when you're in the group, and you get a feel that there are certain rules in place. And now nobody writes these down. You just kind of detect that this is the way it's going to go. This person's going to dominate the group. This person's going to support them. This person's going to do most of the work. And so you just kind of get in the group and you say, all right, that's the way the group is going to be. And you just say, nothing I can do about it. This is a lousy group. I'm just going to have to endure this and get through it. All right, so group process. Now, for a long time there was a theory in group process that said groups go through certain stages in their formation. Have any of you taken group process course yet? Okay, and so they talk about, one of the ways that this gets put is that the group forms. You remember this, Letitia? What's it? Performing, and then evaluating. So this, for a while, there was this linear model of group process that said this is how groups form, or groups do their work. First they form, they gather, and then they fight it out with each other. They storm, you know, they brainstorm. Well, not they brainstorm, they struggle for power and the rules of the group. Who's going to be in charge? Who's going to have what roles? Sometimes this is very implicit. Sometimes this is not very obvious at all. And so that the group storms And then they kind of figure out how they're going to work together. They get some norms. They say, okay, you're going to be the leader of the group, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, and we've got it all set up. Then we can do our performing, and then we can produce whatever our group is supposed to produce, and then in the end we're supposed to evaluate the group. And so this was the idea, and this makes logical sense. You know, this makes sense that that's how a group would go. The problem is that people who've studied this find, and Marshall Scott Poole is a person who studied this, he was interested in studying how do groups really do their work. You know, what really goes on in groups when they work. How do people communicate? How does that communication work in a group as they try to get their work done? And he found out that very few groups do this. You know, there's very few groups that actually work in this way. And that it's actually much more complex and much more chaotic. That it's less predictable what's going to happen. And so he tried to figure out how can I explain what goes on in a group. When people come together in a group, how can I describe and explain what's happening in a group? And so he decided that what he believes, and I'll show you this image, which helps to make sense of this. He believes that groups come into existence and they create themselves as they work together. So that a group produces and reproduces rules and resources. All right, now, how many of you have seen this picture before? You've seen it? So explain to me what's going on in this image. What is creating what here?
It's like a circle.
Okay, it's like a circle. It's like a, what's that?
I think of infinity when I see it.
Okay, it's kind of an infinity thing that this hand might think that it's drawing, but it's actually being drawn by the other hand.
It just kind of works together.
Okay, it all...
It's like they support each other, because if one didn't draw the other, then neither of them did.
Okay, if one doesn't draw the other, then it wouldn't be happening. So if this hand thinks it's in control of the whole situation, it's failing to understand that the thing that it's creating is actually feeding back and creating it. And so when Scott Poole looked at groups, he said, you know, groups are very complicated. When people get together, they have some basic structure that they follow. You know, they set themselves in a circle, they begin to reproduce some structure that they are used to, that they believe is what we're supposed to do. At the same time, whatever they do can begin to change what happens in this group, which then becomes what the group is. And so as he watched groups, he said, you know, groups come into some structure to start with, but then they change the rules, and depending on the resources and their behaviors, they reshape the group, and they keep producing that new group by their behaviors. So the group is a product of the group, and it feeds on itself. This is the idea of adaptive structuration. So there's two mistakes, I guess we would say, or two extremes that this argues about. One of the things it argues against is the idea of a blank slate. This kind of model, forming, storming, norming, gives you the idea that people come in and there's nothing in existence already. And that's just not true. Wherever you go, whenever workplace you show up in, wherever, you have an idea already about what's supposed to be happening, what the rules are. So if you go to a corporation and they put you on a work team, right, that work team has certain rules. So here's a work team, and it has rules about how things go. Now you can go into that work team and look at it and say, all right, this is just the way it is. You know, this is the way a work team goes here. And Poole doesn't want you to do that. He wants you to go in and say, all right, I have now entered this complex production of structure. We are producing this by behaving the way we behave, by talking the way we talk. If we all started to talk differently, this would not exist the same way. And so Poole wants you to see that you have power, or what he calls agency, to reshape the structure. You can't change the whole structure, but you can begin to shape a bit of what goes on there. And so this goes back to the idea, and that's a hard idea, so let me show you Giddens' picture and then we'll try to make sense of it. This is Anthony Giddens. Anthony Giddens is a sociologist in Britain, and he's a very popular commentator. In fact, anybody here tuned in on Democratic Party public relations stuff these days? Anybody? Democratic Party and has been, Giddens has written some books for the Democratic Party about how to reshape social structures. So Giddens is a sociologist who looks at society and the way things are. So this is how things are. And he says, why are things that way? You know, what keeps things the way they are? And what would you say to that? Why are things the way that they are? Why do they stay that way over time? Why do they persist over time? The arrangements or the structures that exist.
Don't people make them that way?
Okay. This is a big jump for you.
Because no one comes in to change anything. It just like once you come into like an area that's like working a certain way, you adapt to it.
Okay, right. So things are a certain way, and people come and they bump up against the way things are, and maybe they try a little bit to change it, and then they just conform. Then they just adapt to it.
It's kind of like you don't want to step on anyone's toes. Like, I started at this like big Italian restaurant, and it was all like family oriented, and I just felt like I wasn't part of the family. Number one, because I'm not Italian,
right?
But like number two, because like I hadn't been there for a long time, so it was kind of like I had to like suck up almost, and like almost like not really step on their toes, but kind of like listen to what they were saying. And then after a while, they like knew that I wasn't a threat, and then I became part of the family.
Right. So you reproduce the structure by choosing to follow the rules. This is a big concept to get a grip on. That when you go into a group, if you follow the rules that exist in the group, you are reproducing it. You're keeping it alive. You're making it happen again. So again, it's like Montclair State, right? Why does Montclair State happen? Because people go to offices and they do what they're supposed to do, and they talk, and students come to classes and everything else. What would happen if tomorrow nobody followed those rules anymore? People didn't come in, students didn't come in. What's that?
So the structure would fall apart.
The structure would not exist. Right? Montclair State University would not exist because people were not reproducing it. It is reproduced every day. It is produced every day by what we do. So this is Giddens' way of looking at society. So Giddens wants to say the way things are is not just like fixed in stone somewhere. Social life is not like cement. You know, it doesn't exist somewhere. Where does social life exist? It exists in the chosen behaviors of people. So as long as we continue to do this and go along with it, it exists. But his argument is, what we have to remember is that we create this. It is a human creation. Montclair State University is a human creation. The United States of America is a human creation. Everything is something we have created, which is different than thinking it just sort of is and it just exists out there somewhere. Right? I mean, we kind of get this idea that, well, yeah, Montclair State exists and I come into it. No, you become part of reproducing it when you do the things that are part of it. You reproduce it. So the idea of seeing a thing as just given, the idea that this is given and natural and it couldn't be any other way, that's just the way it is, it was something called reification. The idea that this is just the way it is, it's not up to anybody, it just is that way. And Giddens wants to say, no, no, no. Every social structure, every institution in society is a product of people's reproducing it. So the way they talk to each other, the arrangements that they accept, the rules they go by, create it. Now, so one person goes into a restaurant, and why is it that you can't change that whole structure? Why is it that you can't, why is it that it kind of sweeps you along like a river? You know, what's going on? Pruden?
Is it something about the individual must adapt to the group as a whole, and if the whole doesn't adapt to the individual?
Okay, so again, it's a group individual issue, which is not unlike Noel Newman's spiral of silence issue, the individual and the group. And here, there's just so much behavior that reproduces this that one person can't really shift all those behaviors. But if you're in a small group, you have more possibility of reshaping the behaviors. So a very simple example that Scott Poole puts into place, there's a small group. In a small group of people, you will go into a group. Let's say you're new to this group. So you go into it, and there's already a whole bunch of patterns and structures set up, right? There are people who are friends, there are people who are in charge, there are people who are doing one thing or another. So you go into the group, and there's an existing structure. And you can go in one of two ways. You can say, oh well, that's the way it is, I just have to live with it. Or you can begin to introduce new patterns of communication, new behaviors that over time may lead to an adaptation of the group. So Poole says, don't give up when you go into a group. Don't say, oh well, I can't change anything. Your behaviors, you have agency. If you change the behaviors and begin to produce something different, the group structure may adapt to that.
For better or for worse, too, right?
Well, yeah, it could be better or worse.
You ever see this independent film, This Is England?
No.
Well, it's the same thing. New guy comes into the group and he's all about anarchy and, you know, really hates. He's very racist, and he kind of distorts the group and
Okay.
splits them up.
Right, so he comes into a group that has rules already to it. He begins to communicate in some way, and the group lets him stay in the group.
Exactly.
And the group adapts over time to a new structure and then begins to produce or reproduce a new structure. Yeah. So the less intense example that Poole gives is if someone goes in who's really quiet. You know, and then this other person is really dominant. Let's say she's like dominant. You know, she's always talking, always in charge of everything in the group. And this person comes in and she's really quiet, and everyone just accepts the way this is. He says, you are just as much responsible for the way that group is as she is. Because by your choosing to remain silent, you reproduce the pattern that exists. You reproduce the existing structures. So Poole wants you to see that you have resources to use that can begin to change the structure of the group. But again, you can't change it all immediately. It takes time. But you have influence. So he wants people to be involved in reshaping groups. So what is this a theory of? What is this a theory? What does it try to explain?
That everyone plays a role in the group. Like everyone has, basically everyone has some kind of contribution to it.
Okay, so it's a theory of group process, and so it describes what happens in a group, and it explains that by saying that everyone's behaviors and everyone's interactions are producing what the group is. Okay, so it explains that, and then it predicts. What does it predict?
That will stay like that until someone else comes in.
Okay, that a group will tend to form a certain structure, and it will have rules and certain behaviors, interaction patterns, that people will start to think that's just the way this group is. And it gives you the possibility of transformation of this situation by what?
Changing your interaction.
By reminding you that this is not given, this is reproduced constantly. And if you change your interaction pattern, you will start to reproduce something different in it. And people will adapt, and people will shift to it. All right, but just like Noel Newman, he says people get a feel over the group for this is how we do things around here. And if nobody speaks up and challenges the rule or behaves in a new way, that will continue in that setting. And that explains why groups are the way they are. So the recommendation would be to change your communication as you're present in that group. Any thoughts about this theory? It's called adaptive structuration.
I think it works much easier in smaller groups, obviously, because
Okay.
if you talk about a group like the United States, for example,
Right.
I don't think this really fits in. For example, say the United States general view on the health epidemic. Like, how are you going to change that so easily? You have to have like a State of the Union address, or
That's what Giddens is about. Giddens is about large-scale social change. That's why he's writing for the Democratic Party now, for instance. He's written a book to guide them in how they should approach the upcoming election year and how they can begin to change the social structures. Giddens is an advisor to the British government as well about what happens in British society. But yeah, so Poole Poole is not trying to think about changing the whole society. Poole is an organizational communication specialist who wants to change the way groups work. So one of the ways he's done this is to take a group and put it into a new structure. So here's a group of people who have to make some decisions about something. And it may be the case that you've got your dominant person, you've got your quiet person, you've got this person who always tries to draw out the quiet person. You know, you've got this person who says, the heck, I'll just do work and get done with this group. You know, so everybody is in the group, and they've formed a structure, and it just kind of sits that way. Now, there are ways that corporations and others try to break this up by using technology. So one of the ways that they try to restructure groups and get people to adapt in new ways is by putting them in a group decision support system. So I don't know if any of you have used this in any of the labs that we have here. Some of our labs are equipped as group decision support systems. So what they do is they will have someone up front facilitating some things. You'll have computer monitors and keyboards here, and people will be participating in the group through the technology. So you might, you know, like IM, right? We all IM and we all text, right? So you might IM a note to the leader, and the facilitator might send it back or send it to other people, and it might put up a picture, and then everyone has to comment on it, or might put a decision up and you vote on it. You know, with your keyboard, you put a yes or a no. In this case, what is providing the structure to the group?
Technology.
Okay, in this case, we have shifted the group's structuring from them reproducing it in perhaps a dysfunctional way, perhaps a way that prevents people from participating. We have now stuck them into a technology structure that reshapes, and they have to adapt themselves to the communication technologies that they're using.
It creates the rules then?
So it creates the rules by which this group will interact and participate with each other. And it makes it more likely that this person will participate in the group because they're not afraid of whatever violating the rules that they were afraid of before. So this is part of the study of technology and group process. Now, some of you, does any of you work now in a corporation that does, you know, multinational work, where you have to interact with work teams through video conferencing, or I guess more in the grad school, I get students who do this. So I've had students in the grad school who will have to stay up till 3 in the morning to go on a video conference with someone in Singapore to have a group meeting that happens. And they structure their group with certain rules and certain resources that give an outcome to the way the group is. And it's very important for them to recognize that they are always producing and reproducing what exists. Instead of just accepting it, they have the ability to make a change in the technology as well. So Giddens and Poole want you to live with a sense of agency. You can make a difference. And one of the things that Poole also points out is that it's very complex. That if you throw a new behavior into a group, you cannot predict what the outcome of it will be. So for instance, Poole gives the example, let's say this person tries to draw out the quiet person in a group. You would think that what would happen would be this person would become more vocal in the group. But what's an alternative thing that can happen? Okay.
Feel uncomfortable.
They could feel uncomfortable that this person's focusing on them.
Puts her too much on the spot, she might just shut up.
Yeah, it might be quite more. This person becomes dependent on this person to participate then. They may form a small clique within the group and further withdraw from the group. So it gets very complicated. As Poole looks at groups, he says it's very complicated how groups form structures. But groups, whatever structure exists, is one that has been produced and reproduced by the communication behaviors of the people who are participating in it.